I recently started playing Breath of the Wild for my second time, and it just hit me how well the Great Plateau introduced all the different features and mechanics in Breath of the Wild. In this video, I'm going to be looking at 7 different things that the Great Plateau introduced to the player that helps them in the Great Plateau and afterwards. First, let's start with climbing and movement. Now this is given to the player right at the very start in the Shrine of Resurrection. Right as you get the Sheikah Slate, you're able to run around, and then you're faced with this wall. And, well, guess what? You gotta climb it. You run into it, you jump, and you can climb it. And that basically just puts right at the beginning of the game, you're able to climb almost anything, right? The only things you can't climb are in shrines. But other than that, you're free in the overworld. You're free to go anywhere. The next thing is running, and this comes up just right afterwards. Right as you get out of the Shrine of Resurrection, and you're open to this massive plateau. You're able to run around everywhere. And then stamina, along with running, gets introduced. Same with climbing, where players are aware that by running and climbing and doing activities like that, also swimming, their stamina goes down. So that's something they can watch for. And they just let the players work it out on their own. They never make a tutorial saying, press this button to climb over this rock. They just let the players figure it out for themselves. The next section is about basic combat. Now, combat isn't really guided that much in the Great Plateau. The only thing really guided is on how to switch between different weapons, but it never really teaches you how to fight. I mean, when you're in a loading screen after you die, I remember it talked about fury rushes, but it never really explains exactly how to do it. At the beginning, you pick up a stick, the camera literally focuses down after the opening scene, so that you see that stick and pick it up. And that's most people's first weapon. Right off the bat, you realize if you press Y, it starts swinging, starts doing damage, and that's pretty much all. It never tells you, press Y when you're next to an enemy to attack it. It wants you to figure it out for yourself. Another thing, like weapon durability, isn't expressly told to you. Eventually, after a little bit of gameplay, after hitting a few enemies, you'll see the pop-up that the weapon's about to break, and then it will break. And then the players are like, alright, I guess that's how it works. Switch to another weapon and keep going. It's just introduced right away. It doesn't give you a prompt saying, weapons break after this many hits, just be mindful, don't forget, or blah blah. It just lets you figure it out for itself. Another thing that's introduced is how fire interacts with different weapons and different circumstances. So for example, I can think of weapons on fire, right? And also the explosives around different enemy camps. If those get lit on fire, then everything explodes and all the weapons are on fire, or the wooden weapons I should say. And this again introduced to the player that wooden stuff can be on fire. And it also introduced some of the basic physics, which is like explosives. If you shoot something that's on fire at an explosive, it will explode. And another thing that goes with those physics are rocks. You can see at the very beginning of the game, it wants you to think of more creative ways to fight enemies. It like puts different rocks up above enemy camps just to give you the inclination that, yeah, you should probably push that off instead of just fighting them with your swords or whatever. Which is great because, again, it's not forcing you to do it. It's not telling you, push those rocks off. It just shows them and you figure it out for yourself. The next section is navigation. This is another thing that the Great Plateau does really well for a few reasons. So at the very beginning of the game, when Zelda says, Link, go to the point marked on your map, you open up the map and you're like, oh wow, alright, this is the map. And then you see a little marker. But everything is not filled in. You don't know where you're going, you just see this dot and you see this arrow where you are. And then, once you get that tower, unlock the tower, it goes up, you see all those towers around the world open, and you're like, huh. And then you see the map that comes with unlocking a tower, you realize, oh, okay, so this is how it works. I unlock a tower to get the map. And this is something that's been seen in other games too. It's not just like a Breath of the Wild thing. A little later in the game, the old man recommends that you go to the top of the tower to look for shrines. And this is introducing the fundamentals of Breath of the Wild, where you're basically just exploring this massive world, and if you're on high ground, then you'll see stuff better. So when I first played, and when I played a second time, I went up to the top of the tower, looked around, saw all 4 shrines, marked them on my map, and I was off. It was just very well done, because it's just hinting hey, you'll see better at the top of the tower. Also, you're able to teleport. Another thing that's introduced later on, so at the end of the Great Plateau, is the scope, and it's not mandatory. If you wander up to the highest point on the Great Plateau, there's like a little monument, and then the old man's up there. And then he says, this is the highest point. If you click in on the right joystick, you can go into scope mode. And I had already used scope before because I played it the first game. But I can imagine if someone hadn't done that they realize, oh wow, I can zoom in and mark things. Just look around, mark places you want to go, and then once you finish the Great Plateau and you're able to paraglide off, it's basically up to you. You can explore any of those markers that you set, or any of those things that you thought were cool. And I love how it's optional. It doesn't force you to go up to the top of that mountain. People who don't go up there are fine. They might not get the warm doublet. They might not know about the scope till later. It rewards those who are already looking to explore a bit, and I like that. So the next section is much shorter. It's just on the weather and environment. So once you start the game, you're not worried about being cold or hot. You're just placed in this world, and you run around. But then there's 2 shrines that are in the cold areas, and that's the Stasis and Cryonis, I believe. So once you go into those areas, there's a few different ways you can do it. You can do it the way I did it the very first time I played Breath of the Wild, which was just eat a bunch of apples and just speedrun it, basically. The other method is to notice that the game puts those red peppers at the beginning of the gate, the main gate into the colder region, and it's like it's hinting to you, pick those up and go cook them. There's a pot right next to the gate where those bokoblins are, and that's what I did the second time. I grabbed them, killed the bokoblins, and then cooked a cold decreasing food meal. Crap. And that higher cold tolerance boost, I was able to, no problem, go around the cold regions, and it was great. But yeah, that's the first time you're introduced to that. You're never introduced to really hot climates. It's only cold climates, and I think that's fine because there are much more cold climates than hot climates in Breath of the Wild, so it's good. The next thing the Great Plateau does well is the shrines and the Sheikah Slate. And this is something that is done just so well. I don't know how to say it. It was so well. You discover these shrines. The shrines are like put emphasis on at the very beginning of the game. Right as you get to the tower and you look for them and the old man tells you he wants the reward from inside of them. You go to all 4 of them, and each one has its own ability. And they're all pretty unique. When I got the Stasis ability, I was so hyped. I was like, no way, I can freeze these objects in time. And I don't know, they're all really cool. And each of the shrines are basic puzzles. The first thing you do is you get the ability, and then the rest of the shrine is just you using it to solve basic problems. Nothing hard. Usually the Sheikah Slate doesn't really have hard challenges involved with them, maybe in later shrines. But the intro shrines, when you first get the abilities, are really simple, and I really like that. I don't know. It just leaves it up to you. Again, there are no prompts in these shrines saying, use the Cryonis right there. You figure it out for yourself. To lift that gate at that one section, you figure it out for yourself. Oh, gotta put it beneath and pull it up. It's very simple, and it doesn't tell you. And then adding on to this is, after you finish the shrines and you exit them, there's usually something to do with those abilities right outside the shrines. Right outside the Magnesis shrine is a little pond, and inside of it is 2 chests. So right as you leave, if you notice those chests, then you're like, oh, let me check if it's magnetic. Pull out the ability, you see that they are, you pull them out, you open them, and you get rewarded with different rare metals. And again, it's rewarding the player for exploring. And then once you do this for the first time, then you're always looking for every time you go around a pond or a lake, pull out the abilities and just check if there might be anything down there. And this just fits the game so well. It's an open world game with barely any guidance. It just makes sense that the Great Plateau gives you the abilities, but it doesn't push you, it doesn't really direct you. You gotta figure everything out for yourself. The next thing the Great Plateau does really well is the day and night cycle. And this is something that I really didn't think about until I played it for a second time. It's really simple, it just goes from day to night to day. And this might seem pretty obvious, but when you think about it, new players will automatically, from the beginning of their playthrough, understand that day goes to night and then to day. And there's no transitions, there's no you have to go to sleep, it just goes seamlessly. And some players will realize that the skeleton enemies wake up during the night, And that's something that I didn't really realize until a little later when I was like, oh, okay, they only spawn during the night. And another thing is, some players will go to like a bokoblin camp and they'll sit at a fire and they'll see, oh, I'm able to sleep till morning, lunch, afternoon. And that's another thing, it's not forcing you to know that you're able to sleep. It counts on you finding a bokoblin camp, defeating them, and then learning that, oh, I'm able to sleep here. I'm not stuck in a day and night cycle every time. And again, it's not directing you, it wants you to figure it out for yourself. And the last section is food and eating. This is something that I didn't really think about until I was thinking about when I was a new player. When I first started the game, you pick up food almost as soon as you pick up that first stick. Right after you pick up the stick out of the Shrine of Resurrection, you see those shrooms on the ground, and there's the apples in the tree, and it never tells you, go pick them up to eat them. You're left to go grab them, and then realize they pop up in your inventory, and then when you click on them in your inventory, you see an eat button. And bada bang, bada boo, you learn how to eat right off the bat. It's nothing complicated, it never tells you that's how you eat. It wants you to notice the food, pick it up, then see it in the menu that you're able to eat it, and then right off the bat, boom, you're done. Another thing that the game shows you in the Great Plateau is that the enemies have food in those big boxes. So when I go to bokoblin camps, usually I go there not for their weapons or to fight them, but because I want to break open those crates or grab that piece of meat from the fire. And that's the 7 reasons. I hope you guys agree with me. That's what I thought. If you have any other things that you think the Great Plateau does well, tell me in the comments. And yeah, see you guys later.